So why the following? The Panerai following is so strong. It's like
It is
like a cult.
Absolutely.
So what? Tell me about like what's a Panerista and why are people so like involved with that particular brand?
You know, I've always maintained that at the core of the Panerai phenomenon is an indisputable legitimacy and credibility, and that little known or little understood connection between Panerai and Rolex. Because in fact, Panerai was the first company to be able to use Rolex cases and movements and dials and do whatever they wanted to them.
Because they inspired the Submariner, right?
I wouldn't say they actually inspired the Submariner per se, but these guys, Panerai started off as a mil-spec company. They made very small quantity watches and technical equipment, combat equipment for use in underwater tactical situations in very small quantities. A lot of times it was just prototypes, it was 8 pieces and it was 10 pieces, and I think it was through that sort of mil-spec back door that Panerai was able to get these movements and these cases and put their names on the dial, which is unheard of in the history of Rolex. So I think that is absolutely one of the main drivers, is that connection with Rolex and the fact that these mil-spec watches actually saw combat. And there are all kinds of stories and epic battles that were fought and won and some lost by these commandos wearing their underwater watches, their depth gauges, their compasses that were all made on a mil-spec basis by Panerai. And so there's that legitimacy there. You know, Rolex doesn't talk about how their watches went into battle, but there are books written about all of the battles that were won and lost with the frogmen, the modern Navy equivalent Navy SEAL guys that were equipped with equipment from Panerai, from the rebreather equipment to the underwater torpedoes, the SLCs, the slow-moving pig torpedo, submarines, and the like. These were our modern day Black SEALs, and I think that's something that a lot of people, a lot of watch enthusiasts really relate to, because it's got that legitimacy weekend warrior look and feel. You know, I also think one of the winning combinations of Panerai straight out of the gate was this was the first company to release a watch that included a special tool and interchangeable straps. For the first time, it was no longer, you know, verboten to change out your strap. I remember when I got my Submariner and I tried to take off my bracelet for the first time, I destroyed my bracelet. I peeled back the metal ends. I didn't know what I was doing. And, you know, and in fact, Rolexes aren't designed to be worn with anything other than the metal bracelets. Not so with Panerai. With Panerai, you know, it was like you could sit down and almost feel like a surgeon with your tool and your straps. And then you had the secondary market of straps being made exclusively for Panerais, with a special cutout for the little fork from the buckle and the exact dimensions. And then you had all kinds of really cool different exotic materials and colors and the like. And so you now have this amazing level of flexibility and versatility. And so for guys that couldn't afford to buy multiple Panerai watches, they could definitely afford to buy multiple straps. And you know, to me, it's amazing how different a watch feels, a Panerai watch feels, when you change out the strap. I mean, you suddenly have a new watch that you can feel giddy and excited about. And I think that's definitely something that definitely resonated with watch enthusiasts. And I think, you know, it's nothing short of an absolute phenomenon. I don't think we'll ever see it again in our time in the watch industry, but you know, they created the precedent for the things that so many of the watch brands are doing, as far as the micro editions, the thematic special editions around the Laureus Regatta, which now IWC has the Laureus Regatta, and now Panerai has the Classic Yachts Challenge, and they've got the special edition for Saint-Exupéry and the like with IWC. So, you know, that whole idea of individually numbering watches so you know exactly how many they made was revolutionary in 1998. Up to that point, you never knew how many watches a manufacturer was making. You know, you could have the most expensive Patek Philippe in the world, but you wouldn't know if they made two because it wasn't numbered.
That's very true.
But Panerai, every single watch was numbered. You know, the millissimation was something that, to me, was a sheer, you know, stroke of genius. for Panerai because for the first time, you had that level of transparency, which is something that I contend is wholly missing from the watch industry today.
Do you think that's one of the reasons Panerai watches hold their value so well?
Absolutely. Well, not only that, as much as a lot of people say that all the Panerais look the same, when you really get into it, it's all about the little intricacies, the little details and the like. But in the beginning, when Panerai only had 7 models, 10 models, 15 models, each one was so different. It was a different material. It was a different dial. It had the textured dial. For the first 3 years, for example, the Power Reserves and the GMTs, they all had the sweep seconds hand, as opposed to that signature seconds dial at 9 o'clock.
Right.
There's still huge demand for those A, B, and C series GMTs and Power Reserves today, so much so that Panerai actually created re-editions of the GMT, the PAM 29, as well as the PAM 28 PVD Power Reserve, and re-released them as special editions. Again, also, I think something that Panerai kind of struck on was this idea of a special edition.
Right.
This very majestic presentation, that huge burlwood box with a lock and key.
Yes.
I know guys, they made cigar humidors out of those, they made tie boxes out of those, they put carbon fiber inserts in them, they're keeping pens in them and the like. For the first time, you had a company that really focused on presentation and provenance. And you also had that idea that with the provenance, you had the sticker on the outside of the box that had the movement number, the chronometer certification number, the edition number. Then you had the chronometer certificate. Then you had the plastic warranty card. And all those things had to line up. I remember back in the day, and one of the ways I got into this watch business where the dealers didn't understand the value of that provenance. They didn't understand how overeducated and how detail-oriented this new wave of watch enthusiasts that were crazy about Panerai were. So I actually had dealers calling me saying, listen, we don't understand these Panerai people. When we get a call for a Panerai, we're just going to call you and you can deal with them. That was literally the start of my business.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's how you're one. I mean, when you think about Panerai in the world, like you're one of the key experts in terms of Panerai.
Yeah, I like to think so. I like to think so.
So, but you're right. You mentioned earlier that they do look alike. So if you don't know Panerai, you just say, why would I pay?
Absolutely.
Why?
Absolutely.
There's a couple of differences. There's the Luminor, the Radiomir. Like, what's the difference between those two types of watches?
So, I would take a step back from there. And so when I'm advising someone or talking to someone about Panerai, I try to, break it into its most simplistic key elements, right? Number one, do you want a watch that's automatic or manual wind? Because for me, who grew up on a Rolex Submariner, I'm not wearing a manual wind watch. Right? Not only that, but if I have a watch without a date, I go crazy. So if you can answer those questions, do you mind if it's manual wind? Does it have to have a date? That's where I start from there. And then we talk about case sizes, for example. So for example, are you looking at, what watch are you coming from? Are you coming from a 38 millimeter Tag Heuer or Omega? Are you coming from a 41 millimeter Omega Speedmaster? Are you coming from a Rolex Submariner? If you're coming from a Rolex Submariner, and I think this was one of the key ingredients that drove Panerai's success. You had so many guys who had Submariners and were looking for something more. And yet the Rolex Submariner was such a standard of excellence. How do you do better than a Rolex Submariner?
Right.
And so, I can't tell you how many guys traded me their Rolex Submariners for the Panerais because they wanted a strap watch. They wanted a watch with a rubber strap. They wanted a watch that they could wear elegant with an alligator strap. And that was definitely one of the key, I think, ingredients of success to the Panerai equation. As I alluded to earlier, that whole interchangeability of the straps. But more than that, it was that freedom and independence to get away from that metal bracelet.
Got it. So the key competitor to the Panerai you would say would be the Sub.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, there were guys that were wearing subs for 5 and 10 years, and they were looking for something different. And yet they didn't want to feel like they were stepping down, because it's like driving a Mercedes, and where do I go from there if I don't want to drive a Ferrari? Well, I kind of consider these watches the Secret Service Escalades.
Okay.
Or the Secret Service, Explorers. Like, these are badass.
Yeah, they are.
Right? And you see a guy wearing a Panerai, he could be a billionaire. He could be a small business owner, an accountant. You just don't know what he is. But, you know, inevitably, he does kind of fashion himself as this sort of sporty, weekend warrior kind of guy. Or, like I said, he's looking for, you know, that sort of touch of elegance with a level of sportiness at the same time.
You're selling me in Panerai, by the way.
You know, I guess it's just my natural exuberance for the brand, you know.